Please welcome President and CEO, Destination DC, Elliott Ferguson, EVP, Director of Americas, VisitBritain, Gavin Landry, and CEO, Rwanda Development Board, Akamanzi,
Clare,
for a discussion moderated by Skift Global Tourism reporter, Rosie Spinks.
Hello to everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today, Clare, Gavin, and Elliott. I'm really looking forward to this conversation that I hope we can keep kind of big picture as we are addressing the decade ahead when it comes to tourism. So I wanted to start with just one question looking backwards. I wonder if there was a moment for any one of you here where you realized that the pandemic and the recovery from it was sort of unlike anything the travel industry dealt with before, and maybe even sort of an inflection point, if you will, or a this changes everything moment. Does any time stand out? Feel free to jump in.
I'll start, and again, greetings from Washington, D.C. I think, really when you think about when I think about where I was, immediately in a phase of denial, and then thinking that, this is happening. Clearly, at some point, we recognize that it is happening. At first, I'm thinking, oh, this will go away fairly soon. To no, this is not going away. There's a precedent, 1918, whereas this has happened before. And this is something that we're all going to have to adjust to. And then it kind of walked into a dark room, not realizing exactly what that meant and what the future looked like. So that was kind of the phases of where we were now, kind of in a proactive phase, similar to what was just stated, thinking that we see light at the end of the tunnel, we hope, even though we're still there, and we're looking towards the future.
Yeah, Rosie, for me, I think, like Elliott, we've been through a number of crises before. And by the way, just good to be joined by Elliott and Clare, who I have great admiration and respect for. This is the first supply side crisis that I've been through in my career. So when you look at 9/11 or you look at the financial crisis in 2008, what we had to do as an industry to recover from those crises was really on the demand side, which are typically, I think, easier to deal with than a supply side crisis that we're in now. So we have a great deal of challenge for us ahead of us to deal with the idea that, reduced capacity, both from smaller airlines as well as just any strictures and residual kind of operating procedures in place, at least in the near term from the pandemic. I think that's what really hit me as something very, very different about the past crises.
Thank you, Rosie. Maybe I'll come in there as well. And I think for me here in Rwanda, and it was maybe two stages. The first one is reading about the pandemic happening somewhere else very far off and thinking that, it's not something that is coming to affect you very soon. And then suddenly realizing that actually this is here with us as well. We have to deal it as well. And then making decisions, which is the second stage, to actually shut down a lot of things, shut down the airport, shut down the national national parks, and then also, going to a total lockdown, something I absolutely had not envisaged even a few weeks prior to that. And now having to deal with closing down everything, cancellations in national parks, cancellations of travel and people coming into the country, and then just seeing that this means that tourism is actually going to come to a complete standstill. That was really a very troubling moment to realize what this means, and also not sure when this is actually going to end.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. I don't think anyone thought it was possible for tourism to just come to a halt everywhere. I certainly didn't. And I think that sort of leads into my next question. There's been this singular narrative about tourism for I'd say the past decade, kind of on the heels of those crises that Gavin mentioned, that it's just been growing, and that everyone, they either love to travel or they want to travel. And, there were some issues, some hiccups. There was over-tourism. There was sustainability concerns, certainly things that were being addressed to varying degrees, let's say. But that generally the picture was very optimistic and the graph was trending up. I wonder if you guys think the next decade will have a very different story from that, or if you think this is a temporary, albeit long, upset that we'll come back to that graph eventually. Who wants to go?
Yeah, Since there's quiet, I'll go first. I think the reality is that the one thing we've all learned is to expect the unexpected. I equate it to a drill that we did, disaster preparedness, as Gavin referenced. We dealt with 9/11 and so many other things. A few years back, we were going through this disaster preparedness drill, and we did everything except for preparation for an earthquake. And guess what happened in Washington, D.C. that day? An earthquake. And there was, it did not resonate that was something that we needed to focus on. And I think moving forward, we're going to have to expect the unexpected. I would like to think it will not be as drastic as, the number of people that have lost their lives and what we're dealing with now. But you just can't be comfortable in terms of thinking that we won't have other hiccups along the way and other things in which we're going to have to deal with.
Claire, would you like to take a stab, or would you like me to go?
Well, I can come in. I think, first of all, I don't know if anybody really knows what's going to happen in the future and what recovery is going to look like. For us in Rwanda, 2019 was our best year in 9 years. Tourism grew by 17%, which was the highest ever, and we reached $500 million in terms of the money that we're making out of tourism. And we had invested in marketing, we had invested in a lot of investments for high-end tourism and hotels and lodges. And so the outlook was really good. And we have, I think the optimistic side of our story is that a lot of people that canceled their travel did not ask for refunds. 90% of them deferred to a future date, some of whom have actually booked a date, or some have left it open. So for me, that I think gives some hope that it's not going to be a very long time. Once the key safety and health protocols are in place, whether it's a vaccine, people can travel comfortably. I believe once we cross that milestone, then we can actually expect tourism to begin to go back to where it was. So I don't look at it as a long-term problem. I see that maybe optimistically 2 years, we should begin to see some serious recovery.
And Claire, if I can just hop in and follow up on something, you as you mentioned, you've had a lot of success with this kind of low volume, high value approach to tourism and centered around sort of wildlife tourism. Is that a strategy that is working, you will stick with, whether this takes 2 years or longer to inch back to normal?
Well, our strategy has been low volume, high value, really looking at, and that's really because of the conservation requirements. We take ecotourism very seriously, and our tourism is very much based on the national parks that we have in the country. And so we've guaranteed tourists that when they come to Rwanda, the things that they'll find, one of them is safety. Even before COVID-19, safety, physically safety, when they go to see the gorillas, we're one of the safest countries on the African continent. And so when we go towards this transition, we also want to build a reputation of safety within the context of COVID-19. And that's expensive to do, to be able to guarantee that everybody who comes to the country is tested, everybody who flies to the country is tested. Anyone who goes to the national parks since we opened in June has to be tested. And we've been testing for free as government. So to guarantee that, you have to make it a high value proposition. And I think we have to keep within that offering in order to be able to guarantee a very safe experience.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Rosie, just to add to that, I mean, in terms of, we've been talking about on the supply side, the sustainability conversation for 20 years or so. And I think the inflection and the change that we've seen in the last few years is that it has finally migrated over to the demand side. So the consumers are starting to demand this. And I don't think that the current traveler and the next generation of traveler will be unaware of their impact on the world by the way they travel. So I think that will continue. We have always, as an industry, I think, been quite kind of rubbish at capacity management anyway. Generally, mass tourism, volume tourism has been driving the bus, so to speak, and also development. So I think that the role that we can play as NTOs and DMOs in terms of capacity management and destination management, as we kind of reimagine things going forward, could be strengthened by the reset. Understanding that sustainability and such, these notions have to be dealt with in a manner that comports not only with government goals, but also with our moral responsibility to the climate and to the planet.
Right. So Gavin, you just used the word climate, which is where I was going to go next. So thanks for that.
Sure.
I wrote a column very early on in the pandemic about how COVID-19 was sort of the global disruption we knew was coming to travel, but not the one we expected, and a lot sooner than we thought. And global disruptions like climate change, like COVID-19, are likely to become more common because of the climate emergency, frankly. And we already saw at the beginning of this year wildfires in Australia, and then of course more recently in California. We have to think about the fact that the more that these events happen, the more extreme weather happens, the less feasible it is to sort of dart across the globe so easily, not only because of the carbon emissions, but also just the practicalities of it. How do destinations think about that? Because I think there's a lot of talk about recovering from the pandemic, but this crisis is not going to go away. Gavin, do you want to start on that one?
Sure. Look, we are taking this opportunity as Visit Britain and throughout the whole of the United Kingdom to take a real look at what we're doing and how we can align with, really with our government's goal of net neutrality, accessibility, sustainability, and also our, a fulsome commitment to diversity and inclusion as a result of the murder of George Floyd. So we are moving in directions strategically that are quite meaningful. When it comes to emissions, I think there's already a great deal of talk about how the industry has a responsibility to continue the progress that's been made. So we will be hosting COP26. We would have hosted it this year in Wales. In Scotland, but we are hosting it next year. That of course is where the Paris Accords came from, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of good thinking going on within the tourism industry. And just knowing that all the new aircraft in the fleet that are coming out are being built for sustainability and levels of carbon emissions that is vastly improved over the old fleets, the way that the entire industry is thinking about their responsibilities, it's very encouraging to me. And I think it's only in its nascent stages.
Mm-hmm. Rosie, if I could come in there as well, I think we can't control what kind of crisis might come in the future. But I think what we can control is our preparedness in building systems that can deal with such crises. And for us in Rwanda, it's been about three things that we're building a system to be able to deal with any such crisis and strengthening what we already have. One of them is how do we, as a part of government, we are a tourism board, how do we continuously earn the trust of the people that when a crisis like this happens, we will create a partnership and a platform where everyone does their part, the government does their part, the people trust that the government is doing the right thing, and then they cooperate, which we saw very useful for the pandemic in Rwanda. Today we have over 4,500 cases with only 27 deaths. And the reason for that is that people wore masks when they were asked to wear masks, people wash their hands. So that level of trust that the government and the people will work together, I think is very important. The second aspect around that is how do we move quickly? Because the crisis happens, there's no time to waste. How do you put in place very quick decisions, implement very quick decisions, whatever the crisis is? I think that ability to move quickly and make decisions quickly, very important. And I think the last one is also adaptability. When a crisis happens and you're counting on one thing, how do you adapt to make the most of what's available? And I'll just end on that note with an example from Rwanda, which is our tourism. Our domestic tourism was less than 5% of the receipts we're making. We were really based on international tourism. But we quickly started something new, which is let's try domestic tourism. Travel had been allowed after the lockdown had been lifted. We started campaigning for Rwandans to start going to see gorillas, mountain gorillas. Many of them were taking that for granted, traveling around, building packages that were attractive and tailor-made or customized for the spending power of our people. So that adaptability to market to a different audience very quickly has helped us have some tourism continue to happen as we wait for international tourism to really take shape. Thank you.
And I think, as I listen to Clare and Gavin, and, I think it's no secret in America, we've got, politics plays such a polarizing role in so many things, including the way the global community and Americans perceive our reaction to climate change. I think if we were to grade ourselves right now from the current administration, it would not be a very positive grade. But it's something as an industry that we continue to focus on. I chair the U.S. Travel Association, and we talk about it. The U.S. with 50 states, D.C. is not a state, but you've got basically 50 states. You've got territories, and you've got the District of Columbia, and each one is run as its own separate country, if you will, to a large extent, which can be kind of discerning as you're trying to focus on something like climate change collectively when different parts of the country have differing views. So we know that it's important. We look at it through the lens of our role as we are attracting people to the U.S. and going to other destinations. So it remains important. And I say that, I preface it by saying what I said simply because I think people can kind of poke holes in the U.S. response to this very important issue.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up with a more direct question. Do you think that in the next 10 years, we can keep growing, let's say, international arrivals and still have a sustainable travel industry, knowing that more arrivals means more emissions, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. If all factions of the industry are truly paying attention and focusing on climate change in a way that they are more responsible, I absolutely think that we can. I think the reality is we're all in the business of bringing more people to our destinations, but at the same time, we have to remain responsible to the cities in which we live and the globe in which we should protect. And they should not be mutually exclusive. And I think that the priority of the governments of all countries, and from a global perspective, is to make sure that there are processes in place so that we do have a safer climate for people to travel. And it starts with all facets of that experience.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
I mean, I totally agree with Elliott. I think that it's very possible to grow in 10 years, but it depends on what all the different stakeholders in the industry do to make sure that travel can be done in a more responsible way. So I think it really depends on what we shall do, but the growth is possible.
Okay. I wonder if any of you are aware of or in your destinations are looking into any work to sort of understand the psychology of travelers as a result of this year. I mean, we talk a lot about, economic indicators eventually coming back to where they were. There's a lot of pent-up demand. I think I've heard it maybe 3 times since Forum began yesterday that, people want to travel where there's life, there's travel. And that's true. But also when I look at the news every day right now, I don't feel a lot of optimism. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. I hope it does. But so, I mean, does that affect how people think about how often they travel, where they go? It doesn't feel like this is just about economics to me. And I wonder if destinations are thinking about that.
Well, I can tell you a little bit of what we're thinking. I mean, certainly when it comes to the residual effects on both consumer and business behavior, these are things that we're very much interested in. So, I mean, we know the airlines will be smaller. There'll be less routes going into destinations. We know that, at least I feel that the demand will outstrip supply, and there'll be massive implications on the supply side, both in terms of capacity restriction and operations. So how do we manage all that together? I think, when you talk about, are there ways that things will change? Yes, of course. How will technology actually change business travel? And that is obviously critical to us in terms of, especially for the airlines filling the front of the plane, the business travel side of things, business events, where meetings and conventions, that sort of thing. What's the future of meetings and events, and how does that come back together? The hybrid models that are being discussed, where it's virtual and in-person type events, and when will that sort of either normalize or codify? And then clearly on the consumer side, I feel like the consumer side is going to be possibly the one that recovers, the soonest, because, the bucket listers still have their bucket lists and have been robbed of a year. The younger audience, the more intrepid travelers, they're willing to get a vaccine and go out there and just live life and build their, sort of their value through a life well lived in travel. So we feel like, or at least I feel like, these are possibly easier solutions. The big box tourism, that's another question. What happens to big events? What happens to the cruise industry? What happens on those fronts? Because those are clearly areas where there's a greater challenge when it comes to, social distancing and the residual effects of capacity management.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Elliott, I feel like you have something to say.
If my wife was here, she'd say he always has something to say. But I mean, the reality is consumer confidence has been compromised. And I think really doing the research into travelers and what their expectations are should not have started simply in 2020. I think that any smart DMO or organization should have really been thinking about that because one size does not fit all. But I think as we're looking at our future, it's going to be tied to, yeah, it's great to talk about how amazing and comfortable my hotel room is and how great my spa is. But people are going to know what safety standards are in place as a prerequisite before you start talking about how great the airline experience or everything could possibly be, because you're really talking about life or death. You're not talking about catching a cold. You're talking about killing grandma or dying from this yourself. So the reality is consumer confidence is going to be compromised for some time until there is a vaccine for COVID. And then beyond that, it will still be compromised because we will not, even though we tend to have short memories in terms of things that happen, this will have a lasting effect. And I think that any advertising, anything that's done should be prefaced with what your standards of cleanliness are, because that might be the difference between me choosing your property, going to your theme park, going to your sporting event or not.
Mm-hmm. Claire, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and for us, how we've tried to balance the two things that Elliott was talking about is also really working with international organizations to guide us on how we can give this confidence to travelers, which is our safety protocols as you come and enjoy our tourism as well. And what we've done is work with organizations like the WTTC. We recently got a stamp of approval. I think we all know about that stamp, that Rwanda is ready for travel because they assessed how we had fulfilled all the guidelines that were there. We also work with the International Civil Aviation Organization, and they also assessed our readiness, our safety protocols, and gave us the approval rating for travel. The EU recently also named 12 countries that were safe to open travel to, and Rwanda was one of them. So for us, it's really been working with international organizations to understand what are the expectations, what are the protocols, and trying to get these independent assessments to help us give that assurance to travelers that it's safe, and not just from our own word, but also working with international organizations they're used to.
Right. Okay. So we have an audience question that I'm going to selfishly put in here because I'm here in the UK, but would like to travel to the US at some point in the future. I wonder if Elliott or Gavin, you're privy to any updates on inter-UK US travel and when that might be. I mean, it's possible now, but when that might be easier.
Elliott, you want to take a shot at that?
Of course, now you're going to be really gentlemanly about that. I think that I'll say the sad part of it all is that politics might play a role in this decision, which is extremely, at least from the standpoint of the U.S., which is unfortunate. I don't have an answer. I think that again, there's so much confusion in the U.S. in terms of who you should go to for answers and protocol. That it's kind of, I know you guys are reading the stories, I'm living the story, and if you live in the US or somewhere else, we don't have our act together. And I understand the response globally in terms of, the US, individuals in the US being able to travel to different destinations. I'd like to think that as we're moving along as a nation, that people are seeing that we are adhering to more of the protocols and that you see the rate going down. But there's no crystal ball that will say when the borders will open. But we know that it's a very big and important area of concern for all of us. I will say, though, that even if and when the borders do reopen, consumer confidence, which is the most important thing, will still be compromised for some time. So instead of me deciding to go on an international trip, therefore wearing a mask for 8 to 10 hours, I might choose to not go, and not because of fear of going to that destination, but because that's just the mentality that we're going to be dealing with in terms of attracting visitors to our destinations.
Yeah, I agree with Elliott there. And I mean, look, in terms of there's talk of an air bridge between New York and Heathrow. It's changing so much on a daily basis that it would be unwise to kind of pontificate there. But I will say that, when you look at the traveler experience, everything from getting there to arriving there to being there, the way that the pandemic, I mean, if there is a silver lining, which there never is with such a horrible event like this, but it has forced upon the industry a use of technology, a way of operating that was long overdue. So the airport experience, UV scanning through the baggage checks, all the temperature check profile or protocols, things that are being done there. The same thing with the airlines, the way that they're operating their cleaning and their programs. I mean, Delta has announced a massive improvement on that front. These are all things that, frankly, could have been done years ago, but have been forced upon or foisted upon the industry because of what we're dealing with. So I think that the combination at the end of the day, will be a better traveler experience, one that will be more reassuring to folks as they travel, because they will feel that both in getting there, arriving there, and being there, that they're being treated with a much higher level of protocol and respect to what's going on.
Yeah, I've certainly actually heard from people I know who've flown recently that it's arguably a better experience than it was before. I'm going to just finish up with the results of our poll and invite you to respond to anything that brings up for you. So is tourism in the midst of a paradigm shift or a temporary upset? We have 33% saying A, paradigm shift. The decade ahead will not be as fueled by growth as the last. B, 49% saying B, temporary. Tourism will be back to where it was pre-crisis. And then C, 17% saying nobody knows and no one can predict. Perhaps that 17% is the wise among our audience. Any thoughts on that poll? I'm quite surprised by the 33%. I thought that would be lower in the Skift audience. What do you guys think?
I tend to think that it is temporary. I think I heard Clare say it, or at least it was stated that the decision and desire to travel by the global community has not changed. It's just a matter of when, because it's tied to things that we did not have to deal with as much up until now. So I think there will always be an interest and a drive and a demand to travel. It's just a matter of one, economics, one, safety, two, economics, and then other variables that people are going to have to consider. But people still want to get out. They want to go to Rwanda, they want to go to Great Britain, they want to come to the US. It's just a matter of what are we doing to make sure that they feel comfortable and safe as they're looking at these destinations.
Any other thoughts on the poll?
Clare, did you?
Well, I think I already actually stated my thinking on that. I truly believe it's temporary. I actually see 2 years. Within 2 years, we should begin to see some real recovery. And I think the reason for that, as Elliott very well put it, is because the desire to travel is still there. And when I look at my bookings, I see that, well, I don't have as many new bookings as I had before, but all those that had traveled before don't want to cancel. They're not asking for refunds. 90% of them are asking to be allowed to defer to whenever they think it's safe to travel again. And I think that desire to travel still being there, it means that once the health fundamentals are addressed, we should be able to see travel coming back. It might change many ways that we do business, but I think the desire is still really there.
Yeah, we've got, just from our standpoint with VisitBritain, we've done quite a lot of modeling, both for external and internal stakeholders. And, by our modeling, with a big asterisk, obviously, depending on what happens, but, we are expecting our major markets to be back at pre-pandemic levels, or anywhere between 2024 and 2026. So yes, it will be a long burn with a long tail, sort of how long is a piece of string type of a situation, but it's what we expect. The demand is there. It's pent-up demand. Now it's on us as an industry to take this supply side crisis and do the right thing by it.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that you said 2026. That's more than halfway through the next decade. So,
sure.
That's not that can't quite be, that counts as a sort of smaller decade, I think. Even.
Sure. Yeah.
Rosie, I would say too that there will be a short-term paradigm shift. Whereas as we're looking at our marketing, we're looking at the drive-in market versus the international market coming. So there will be some short-term decisions made as it pertains to that. And I think everyone's probably doing the same things because we're trying to get our hotels full and open again, and restaurants. And we know that there's the best opportunity to do that would be tied to those that live within 250 miles of Washington, D.C. And for that's 50 million people. So I see that as a priority as we're looking at a short-term thing. 9/11, it took us 10 years to rebound in terms of visitation after 9/11. The world has changed a lot since then, but it's not necessarily a quick turn of events in terms of it'll get us back on track.
Sure. And maybe what I can add as well is I think the speed with which tourism can bounce back will also depend on how we minimize the damage, if I can put it that way, of how tourism sector is affected today. For us, it's been about how do we make sure that the hotels don't become bankrupt and close? How do we make sure that the tour operators are preserved? How do we make sure that, because if they get out of business, getting them back will take much longer. So what we've done is put in place something we called an economic recovery fund of $100 million. We've helped to restructure a part of loans of hotels that have loans in the financial sector. And we've also put away some money to help them with working capital. So we think preserving or minimizing the damage as much as we can support them too will help them recover faster when the time comes.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today and for this frank discussion. I know I appreciate it, and I'm sure our audience does too.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks, everybody.
Good to see you, folks.
Thanks, Gavin, Elliott, Rosie.
Be well.